So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Craik and Lockhart's ideas about levels of processing. And when Craik and Lockhart discussed this, they actually hypothesized about 6 different characteristics of processing cues that might actually facilitate processing of information. So the first thing that they actually discussed was the idea of meaningfulness. And meaningfulness meant depth of processing. What is meaningful to you are things that you will pay greater attention to. And so the more meaningful you could make something as you're teaching, as you're working with a client, that would help that person to be able to process that information to deeper levels. As well, Craik and Lockhart talked about elaboration as a strategy. Elaboration means breadth of processing. So imagine that your memory network was set up in terms of its depth, the vertical dimension, and its breadth, the horizontal dimension. The more elaboration you have, the more contact there is among different pieces of information, and therefore the network would be more powerful if, in fact, there was greater elaboration of that network. Compatibility means new information has to be compatible with old information. So I can't teach psychological principles differently than they teach those principles in psychology. I want you to be able to use those principles and add on to them with the knowledge of motor learning. Familiarity. Remember that what we're attracted to is what's going to capture our attention. So familiarity with information, the more I can make that information familiar, less complex in a sense, easier for you to process that information and be able to store, and store is not a good word, but rather to be able to process it deeper and more elaborately. And finally, a principle that's very important to our future discussion in the next couple of classes, and that is encoding retrieval specificity. Encoding means putting information into memory. Retrieval means taking information out of memory. Specificity means the same. So the closer you could make encoding and retrieval, the better the processing or the retrieval of that information will be. So we're going to be discussing this later on in terms of the organization of practice. But right now, I wanted you to have a good sense of these 6 factors and what they mean. I'll see you on Thursday.